So this is not only about fighting against the military junta. This is also about fighting the outdated societal norms and also these old ideologies which are discriminating us for decades, or let's say for centuries. Almost every woman I talked to, they told me that we have to do the revolution twice. It means that not only revolution against the military junta, but also against the patriarchy within the resistant groups. We are in the middle of a severe armed conflict, and also in the middle of grave human rights violations. There, we always say that we as activists, we tell ourselves that we should not act like a dictator while we are fighting against a dictator.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode. As you know, the current crisis in Myanmar is extremely concerning, and we appreciate that you're taking the time to stay informed. There is even value in just becoming more aware and helping to inform others. So please consider sharing this episode so that more people may learn about what is happening in the country. It's critical to ensure that this issue remains present in public discourse. But for now, let's get on to the interview itself.
And welcome back. I'm joined today by Nyein Chan May, who is, among other things, an intersectional feminist, a fellow podcaster, and very interestingly, co-founder of the German Solidarity Myanmar, which is a group who have been very supportive, very helpful on the European front in trying to raise awareness of the coup and the struggles of the people of Myanmar. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on a myriad of topics that we're going to be discussing today. But I'd like to give you the chance to introduce yourself a little bit more completely to our audience.
Thank you very much for having me here. My name is Nyein Chan May, as you mentioned, and I am intersectional feminist and podcaster of a podcast called Tessin, which is a small black textile above the Longyis, women's Longyis in Myanmar. And this is the name of my podcast, and also co-founder and board member of German Solidarity Myanmar. German Solidarity Myanmar is a young activist organization which was founded directly after the coup in 2021. We support the Myanmar democracy movement through political education, public relations, and advocacy. Our organization is committed to a more decisive stance and proactive Myanmar policy on the agenda of the Federal Republic of Germany and the European Union. And also the podcast I am doing is about feminism, and also when we talk about feminism in Myanmar, it sounds always far away, or it sounds always, oh, this is kind of vocabulary which is going around only in civil society organizations or in the bubble of NGOs. That kind of the sort of gap I would like to close, and so that's why I started doing my podcast. Tessin is a member of a podcast network called Bama Podcast Network. And yeah, I define myself as intersectional feminist because I believe that the discrimination we face as women, and also this discrimination which marginalized groups faced, are never one-dimensional. They are intersectional. So that's why I focus on studying feminism and also intersections of discrimination. So recently I published a long article about intersectional feminism within the democracy movement in Myanmar.
Mm. And so I just want to focus a little bit on intersectional feminism. We'll definitely come into greater detail with it, but I'm just wondering what the other component is. Intersectional implies that you're looking at the intersection of feminism and some other dimension. What would your primary I don't know what the technical term for that would be, the secondary component. What intersections specifically would you focus on?
For example, I also answered the similar question why I was talking in the European Parliament, why we should talk about intersectionality when we talk about Myanmar, why it is important to talk about intersectionality. Because when we think about Myanmar, Myanmar is a complex. Myanmar has a complex of ethnicities and also identities, and also then discriminations. So if we don't think about intersectionality of discrimination, pattern of discrimination, and also pattern of violence, then the solution finding process, or let's say attempt to find solutions, would not be effective as much as they would. So this is what brings me to intersectionality. And second thing is, I already mentioned about identities and also about ethnicity. So in Myanmar, you can imagine that a woman or member of marginalized groups and also be discriminated because it's a woman, or because it's member of a marginalized group, or because it's from ethnic minorities, something like that. So you see that such sort of pattern of discrimination intersect. So this is what brought me to study intersectionality of feminism in Myanmar.
Fascinating. And I want to sort of take a step back, because you're, speaking of that intersection, you're in the intersection of the German sphere and the Myanmar sphere. So I wonder if we can just sort of understand more about your personal journey. Were you born in Myanmar, or were you born in Germany?
I was born in Myanmar, born and raised in Myanmar. I left the country shortly before the coup because I wanted to study political science and sociology here in Germany. Mm-hmm. And also with focus on intersectional feminism and feminist foreign policy. When I left the country, there was no feminist foreign policy in Germany, but with the time and also after the coup in Myanmar, Germany announced feminist foreign policy. So my academic focus is really on that area. So, and in the meantime, I talk about I was born and raised in Myanmar, but I was a privileged person. I was born and raised in a big city. And there, you see that the problem is like when you are privileged, you tend to forget to check your own privileges. So this is where it gave me the alarm, like, you're a privileged person, you're a privileged woman, but what about the other women and marginalized groups? What are they experiencing in the country? And also in the meantime, you are now in Germany, you are now studying political science and also intersectional feminism. So what can you do about it? And what can you find out academically? So this is, yeah.
So this is interesting. You're saying that there was no feminist foreign policy when you arrived in Germany. So you've been able to see, it seems, the birth of a field right
Yes.
right in front of you, and it seems in response to a very acute need. Did you have a hand in that, or you're aware of how it came to be that the Germans looked at the situation and said, wow, actually, you know what, we have a need for feminist foreign policy. Let's do something about it. Let's actually make this happen, because that's a relatively fast turnaround.
Yeah. It was also a coincidence, let's say. The year, so shortly before Germany announced its feminist foreign policy 2 years ago, Sweden announced cancellation of feminist foreign policy. So for me, as a person who is studying feminist foreign policy, it was very interesting to see that dynamics shifted. But in the meantime, in Germany, it is also interesting to see that the coalition agreement of Germany's ruling parties. Germany has three ruling parties. They have FDP, they have the Greens, and they have SPD. So in their agreement, they have everything in German, right? And then only at that area, feminist foreign policy was in English, was written in English. So it was like for me, okay, why? So as Germany announced feminist foreign policy and then also feminist development policy, of course, the backdrop or backslash against it started from their house. It means that for Germany is of course then is foreign office and so on. But the focus of feminist foreign policy is then here about human security. And also, yeah, you already mentioned that I had the chance to experience the birth of feminist foreign policy in Germany. I actually was also in the initial dialogues with the German foreign minister, and when she wanted to collect voices around the globe, and she wanted to tell us which kind of foreign policy we can imagine what Germany could do. So yeah, it was also very interesting and also Germany had the chance to learn what Sweden has done and what Germany could do better. But then later, with the war in Ukraine, with Russian aggression in Ukraine, and also now, and then also Jinji and Azadi movement in Iran, and also now with the war in Gaza, Germany's feminist foreign policy was and also is really, really harshly criticized. Yeah.
Fair enough. As it's just fascinating to see. And so let's then talk about the other side of that, is what is this in response to? So the thing about the conflict in Myanmar is that we tend to talk about it in very simple strategic terms, military terms, even in terms of resources, money, food, things like this. And you are saying, or you have said in the previous discussions that we've had, that there is this almost unspoken element of this conflict where women and other marginalized groups are still very much fighting, even within the revolutionary movement, which is by and large quite countercultural, quite progressive, very dominated by young people, have been very influenced by Western ideals. Women and other marginalized groups are still very much fighting to gain equal footing with their peers. And let's talk about that a little bit. So I want to start with women's roles as you see it in the revolution? Do you feel that the women are simply not being given the opportunities to take on the roles that they want to take on, and take on the roles that they could be taking on, and contributing with? Is there still this legacy of assuming that women are less capable?
I have to say very sadly, yes, this legacy is still existing. I mentioned the article I wrote about intersectional feminism in Myanmar's democracy movement. There, I had the chance to talk with women at the front, and also with other marginalized groups who are at the front, and also who are working on the ground, and also in the meantime who are some are then underground activists. They mention the point that how they start joining the democracy movement. It starts with simple spark. It is the spark of not accepting this unjust coup by the military junta. It is very clear. So they told me we joined this movement because we can't tolerate this unjust act. And then later they find out that, okay, so this is not only about fighting against the military junta. This is also about fighting the outdated societal norms and also these old ideologies which are discriminating us for decades, or let's say for centuries. So this shift was amazing for me, because I had this hypothesis. I always believe that when I see our Longyi, our flag movement in March 2021, I had strong hypothesis that this is not only about fighting against the military junta, but also fighting against the patriarchy, which is entrenched in the Burmese society. So that's why I started talking with all the comrades, and also all the women and marginalized groups on the ground. So they said, yes, we realized that, okay, this cannot continue, this kind of legacy that women are second sex of the society. They are not capable. So almost every woman I've talked to, they told me that we women, we have to do the revolution twice. It means that not only revolution against the military junta, but also against the patriarchy within the resistant groups. So this is the first thing. And the second part is, I have talked about this, our Longyi, our flag. I've talked with the persons who has led this campaign, who has led this movement. And for me, it's always clear that if we, as women in Myanmar, if we fight against the patriarchy, if we fight against the military dictatorship, we will have our own flag. And this flag is our Longyi. And this just resonates with the women who led this movement. And yeah, we also talk about it. Not only about, I think you have already read about it so many times, but again, Longyi or women garments were instrumentalized by the military junta, by patriarchy, men and women as discriminatory object for centuries. So this is very revolutionary approach for me.
And I want to talk about this a little bit, because this is something that drew me in, and I think it's one of those beautiful things about the revolution, particularly about the revolution as it existed in 2021, because there were so many things that people were doing to protest, which offered not only a pushback against the military, but also was trying to make a serious inroad into bringing about systemic social change. And to us on the outside, it was offering this fascinating insight into Myanmar culture and history. And the Longyi, or more specifically the Tamain, was, as you say, instrumentalized, but it came in this variety of forms. We saw the military putting or cutting down wires that had Tamain slung across them because they were scared to physically proceed along the road for fear that they would walk underneath the Tamain and that they would lose their pawn. And this is something that from the Western perspective seems very strange. It seems like, well, it's a superstition, but why would you take a superstition so seriously that you, as a soldier with a gun, are afraid of a piece of fabric? But this runs very deep. So I wonder what insight you can give us into what was happening with the Tamain, the Tamain Kantat, the barricades with women's clothes, and just generally the backlash, the Gen Z draping themselves in Tamain as an act of defiance against these superstitions. What light can you shed on this phenomenon?
I shared the story you just mentioned to the German foreign minister, and she found the story fascinating. But firstly, the thing is, then I have to tell the story very, very long, longer than like a minute, because you just you summarize the story very beautifully in a minute. But I have to tell, firstly, Tamay was instrumentalized as discriminatory object in the society in Myanmar. And secondly, Burmese military junta and its soldiers, they have this superstitious belief within. So this is, the so long story I have to tell her, and then later to the point. Yes, you can see the soldiers, they were cutting wire, and then they went around the streets because they didn't want to go through go through under Longjis and so on, go through under Tamay and so on. So we have like discussions among our feminist friends. So where does it come from, or what is that? So the thing is, the first thing is we have like some of my friends believe that this is what the military junta wants the society to believe, that Tamains are disgrace. Tamains are just unclean and dirty, and also very disgraceful object in the society. This is what they wanted the society to believe. So this is what some of my friends say. Other friends believe that no, this is also what the military junta itself believe, that women are just second sex and they are not capable, and they are just service provider of the men who were warriors in the history and who fought wars bravely, something like that. So these are our discussions, and also our findings, let's say, but not debating about where it comes from, but we can focus what is the impact of such kind of myth, or such kind of cultural brainwashing. Because I told you I was born and raised in Myanmar, in big city, but in the meantime, our household had a father who didn't want Longyi in his eyesight. It means in front of the house. We have to hang our Longjis, we have to hang our tamays in the backyard of the house, which led, of course, to hygiene problem and something like that. So this is very practical part. And the second part is the second part is that Tamay is also just a piece of textile. This is what you already mentioned, what the Westerns would see. But I also did some research about writing about Tamains. Apart from some academic articles analyzing instrumentalization on Tamains, otherwise there's so few in-depth article or writings about Tamain being instrumentalized. So I also found, for example, some article talking about how beautiful the Tamains are, how different and beautiful the patterns are. I mean, yeah, behind that patterns, we have also patterns of discrimination. We are facing different patterns of discrimination as different patterns of Tamains.
Mm. Absolutely. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it the case that, according to legend, King Anoyata died because the women threw their tamain onto an effigy of him, and as a consequence of that, he lost his pone and he was gored to death by a gnat in the form of a water buffalo, something along these lines.
Yeah, it was also is again the myth and also the stories are really, really different. And other story is I think you would remember two brothers. I think Biawi Biata. So one of them was caught in the old city of Mon area, I think, and he was caught by Tamain, and also even the Tamain of a mother of a newborn child. So yeah, you can see that such kind of story and also myth, which was targeted to women, are entrenched in our culture, in our thinking.
Mm. And it's you bring up the military's sexism, and it's a thing that I circle back to frequently, and I've many times I've characterized the military as a cult. Different people either agree or disagree with that as they see fit. But one of the reasons that I characterize the military as a cult is because of their entrenched sexism. The I mean, there's no real other way to put it. The commodification of women within the military as either agents of rank, a way by which you can associate yourself with a higher ranked man by marrying his daughter, marrying his sister, something along these lines, or alternatively as servants that can basically be rented out to higher ranking officers, or alternatively simply as the mothers of the next generation of soldiers, leading to this much reviled tradition of raffling off the wives of dead soldiers to make sure that they stay reproductive and also within the military as an entity. It's almost cartoonish how the women
Yes.
are treated in the military, but this just goes into this long-standing history of the way that women have been seen, have been viewed, and have been commodified for the purposes of powerful organizations and men. So it seems that there would be a very strong desire on the part of the revolution to distance themselves very pointedly from this type of denigration of women, relegation of women to secondary roles, these views that women are less worthy. It seems that if for nothing else, for political and social reasons, that is a form of revolution. And talking to you, it sounds like that element of the revolution is not really succeeding.
I have so what you have mentioned has two parts. So the first part is about military being. You define military as Burmese military as a cult. I agree with you, and also you mentioned three points, and and also who is married and who is also very interesting because in this so-called written history, or let's say, I wouldn't say history, but these stories of Myanmar ancient times. So you can also see that which warrior married whose daughter, or the king's daughter, or something like that. Or more interestingly is that they trade daughters, sisters, and even sometimes wives for peace or for trade agreement or something like that. So you can see that these kind of stories, women as just as sex objects, or women just as servants, the women were treated just as servants. So you see these are entrenched already for centuries. This is very clear. And the second part is, you mentioned 3 points. So I would like to add another point is misusing mother instinct. Because wife of Min Aung Hlaing, Jujula, she wrote, I think it was a long time ago, but she's still doing it. Is talking like that she is mother of all the junta soldiers in the country. And she's talking about, mother is talking to you guys and blah, blah, blah. So this is like abusing mother instinct. So this is the fourth part I would like to add. Yes, the point you mentioned, the revolution, and also, I already mentioned that women are marginalized group who joined the resistance movement. They have this goal to fight against the military junta and also to fight against the patriarchy. But in the meantime, this is also very, very, this has to be treated very carefully, because we are in the middle of severe armed conflict, and also also in the middle of grave human rights violations. There, we always say that we as activists, we tell ourselves that we should not act like a dictator while we are fighting against a dictator. This is very, very important because I already mentioned that women have to do revolution twice. It means that where did it come from? Where does it come from? So the one part is women who want to be at the front. They have to. I talked with them and they told me they have to prove that they are strong enough to go into battlefield, or they are strong enough that the other male comrades could not think that these women or members of marginalized groups are a burden for them. So you can see that women who joined the resistance movement against their parents or against their society, against their community, but then they are not welcome as much as their male colleagues are welcomed. So this is kind of the inequality, but there is an equality, there is an equal point where women and men or comrades were treated. It is about penalty. It is about receiving penalty. Then they are treated equally. So you can see that what gives me a thought is to prove the men that I am not a burden. We are not a burden for them, or promising them that we will not be a burden in this battle. So this is for me still, this is where I thought we still have a lot to do. I mean, we didn't set our expectation too high, but in the meantime, we are really happy that the progress there is some progress, but in the meantime, there's still so many things to do.
But so you would agree then that compared with Myanmar society as it existed in 2019, 2020, the current attitudes, the prevalent culture within the pro-democracy elements of society, you would say on the whole has improved from 4 years ago?
I would say among young generation, yes, but there is still very low progress among old generation or our former generations. I wouldn't blame them because I mean, where were the opportunities to learn, or let's say unlearn patriarchy? So that's why we have been talking to unlearn patriarchy, unlearn these cultural societal norms which are outdated. But among our young generation, we see progress, but still, as I mentioned before, so we still have to prove that we are capable. We still have to prove that we can also, I don't say as strong as men. It is about physical condition and so on. I don't say that, but I mean that the contribution of women and marginalized group is the same as what our men colleagues can do and can contribute.
Absolutely. And more so than just the discrimination that we've just spoken about, I understand that even within the revolution, there also exists sexual harassment. Is this a prevalent issue?
I'm sorry. Recently in April, Irrawaddy had published an article about mistreatment of women prisoners by some PDFs and so on. I think this is seeing such kind of articles published for me is a progress, because some people would say that it would damage the image of the revolution, or some people will say that we should fight together against the military firstly, we should fight against the common enemy firstly, and later we can talk about gender equality and so on, or we can talk about women and so on. In my point of view, the revolution or the resistance movement also needs manpower, human resources, let's say. So it means that we women in Myanmar, we have more than half of population. So everybody, if the revolutionary forces say everybody must join the fight, everybody should join the fight, then but later when they discriminate women as like the military junta does, or when they ignore the sexual harassment cases which is happening on the ground, in the battlefield or in refugee camps and so on, then it is not different than from the military junta. And it can also it can also bar the women and also marginalized group from joining the resistance movement more and more.
And let's then talk about the prisoners as well, because the plight of prisoners is something that's a little bit difficult to understand, because naturally they're not being given the opportunity to come and speak for themselves. That's in the nature of imprisonment. We only really know from occasionally lawyers, if someone is lucky enough to have legal representation, or from the people who have been fortunate enough to be released, and then they are able to give accounts. So we don't, I think, have the complete picture of what's happening with the political prisoners, of which there are still thousands and thousands and thousands. But what can we know about the plight of female prisoners or of LGBT prisoners? Are they facing sort of particular suffering, particularly because they are in the hands not of the pro-democracy, more liberal, Western-minded people, but rather they are in the hands of the much more conservative and much more aggressive military and military-controlled police? Do we know what's happening with them?
Yes, I heard a lot of stories, and also the women political prisoners and LGBTIQA plus political prisoners who were released, and they shared their stories, and also they shared the stories of their cellmates. The stories are really, really. I have to say that these are really, I don't want to say disturbing, but these are the inhumane stories, how they were treated in prisons, how they were treated in interrogation center, and this also has effect because military junta is sending message via such kind of torture and inhumane treatments within prisons and interrogation centers that women and marginalized groups, LGBTIQA plus, this is not your place. And if you get involved in this political movement and this political thing, and you will get this. So this is like sending, sending a signal to the population. So this is very first thing. Second thing is we know what is happening. I don't say we know everything, what is happening behind the wall of prisons, but we know the stories and what they are suffering through. But in the meantime, we see not only the stories of sexual harassment, sexual assault by women prison guards and also male prison guards, and then also by police, and also which kind of swear words they use and so on. You cannot imagine that what women and LGBTIQA plus have to go through while they are detained in interrogation centers. So the thing is like I already told about that. The military junta wanted to send message, but in the meantime, it is also about they know that they can get away with that. They torture people, they humiliate people, and they treated these humans at the most brutal way as they can. So, but they know that the military junta knows that they can get away with that. So that's why we are trying to, we as activists who are living outside of the country, together with activists who are inside the country, we are trying to collect these stories and this information, and we are trying to say the world that this is happening. Because the voices of women political prisoners and LGBTIQA plus political prisoners are still unheard, because they are not voiceless. This is what I always say. They are not voiceless. They have their voices. They try to send their messages through their attorneys, through their families, and so on. But people sometimes they overheard these voices. And this is kind of what I am doing to present their voices and to present their voices to be heard. And another thing is that seeking for justice is more expensive, is sometimes more expensive than other things, because the women and LGBTIQA plus political prisoners, when they are released, they don't dare to share their stories. They don't dare to talk what they have been going through in the prisons or in interrogation centers, because they are afraid of being stigmatized by the society, by the community. So it is for us important to see that what is the root cause of this happening. It is like, for me, it's a labyrinth, because the society or the community has this problem, and also then the people who suffer through, they don't dare to speak. So this is like kind of labyrinth. This is like a never-ending story. And the last thing I wanted to say is yes, of course, when I talk about women political prisoners and LGBTIQA plus political prisoner in Myanmar, I always talk about not only their suffering, not only their torture, not only their mistreated brutally, but they have their resilience. this is very important, because every women political prisoner I have talked to, they say they don't want to be seen as victim. They wanted to be seen as active part of the resistance movement who are still trying to get involved from whatever role they have. They want to contribute, they still want to contribute to this democracy movement. And this is very strong. And this must be seen by the international community, because, when we talk about democracy movement in Myanmar, the international community sees that, okay, this is armed conflict, there are political groups, there are actors, is done. But the women's and marginalized groups and LGBTIQA+, their involvement and their participation was always overlooked, also by the international community, and this should stop.
Absolutely. And so the follow-up question then, actually, well, there are quite a few that come out of this, because you're sitting in this fascinating nexus between the Myanmar situation and the German sort of audience, if you will. So you're saying the message that you want to spread to the outside world is that this is going on, that this is deeper than just an armed conflict, this is deeper than just a political struggle. But what specifically do you want to tell them about how the women's rights and LGBT rights have been evolving? Is the message that you're trying to spread that there has been progress and that people are pushing for progress on social fronts, or is the message that you're trying to spread that sufficient progress is not being made and that there are still significant struggles with discrimination and harassment, and more assistance and more focus is needed to help drive these types of social improvements? What's the focus of your communication?
The very first focus of communication is to give the audience, let's say for us, then the targeted audience is done here in Germany and also in the European Union. Is then clear target or a clear focus of the democracy movement. What we want. Sometimes it's just like sometimes it's very blurry. It's really general when we talk about, okay, we want federal democracy, but how and why? So I always say that strategic communication plus clear messaging, because not everybody has or had time to Google Myanmar or what is happening in Myanmar. I mean, they don't have time to read the more than 7 decade stories, what was happening in Myanmar or what is happening in Myanmar. So this is very first thing, clear messaging. Second thing is, for me as an intersectional feminist, it is important to point out, especially country like Germany, they also should know that they have feminist foreign policy. So what feminist foreign policy could do more for women and marginalized groups in Myanmar, because Germany has written on its flag feminist foreign policy and considering human security, considering women's and marginalized group, considering their participation and also prevention and so on and so on. So if country like Germany says that, then for me, as an advocacy person, it's important to point out that yes, in Myanmar, this kind of not only the political struggle, but also the social struggle to tackle down these old ideologies and to form a new society, it is existing. What could Germany do? What could Germany support these people? So yeah, this is the second kind of messaging. And the third thing is we always talk about then, this is also important. When people talk about Myanmar and also democracy movement, people always say, or international community always sees that, okay, we have this amount of money we just donated to the UN is done. And we always say that supporting Myanmar is not only about giving money. We don't want, yes, of course, we have the areas, we have the biggest humanitarian crisis in the region, but in the meantime, supporting Myanmar has to be with political will. So these are three kind of messages I always deliver.
I think that's quite robust, but I do want to look a little bit more deeply at it, because this is a really tricky thing, and this is something that comes back all the time. When you look at a situation and you say, wow, that situation is really bad. There are people who are trying to do the right thing. There are people who are trying to make improvements, and I want to help and I want to contribute and I want to do something significant to help this happen. But then the question is, what can one do? If we were talking in purely military strategic terms, well, then it's relatively straightforward. We can say, well, here are guns, here are bullets, all that sort of stuff. We understand how to do that. But this is a much, much, much more complicated thing. This is a social change. This is, if you will, it's more of a conflict within the collective mind of society, which is much harder to fight. Are there any specific tangible things, especially now during the conflict, during the revolution, that people on the outside can do to help support the progress of women or ethnic minorities or sexual minorities or any other marginalized groups? Like, what can be done in such a tumultuous time?
I always say that the international support for Myanmar should have intersectional approach, because this is where intersectionality came again in our talks, because we talk about that the international support was there like since 2010, supporting the NGO, supporting civil society groups and so on, but now is time to rethink how to support Myanmar more effectively, because the donor countries, they tend to stick in their old strategy or old approaches, but the world has changed. I mean, and also the power dynamics within Myanmar has also changed. And in the meantime, the collective leadership, or let's say the attempt of young generation to define collective leadership has also shifted. So that's why it is the intersectional approach of supporting Myanmar is needed. And in the meantime, the tangible support, for example, if someone asks me, what can we do for Myanmar? I always say, firstly, is to support the civil society organizations and groups, and also independent media, and also pro-democracy organizations. This is very, very fundamental thing which international community could do, because weapons or whatsoever, leader weapon whatsoever, this is what we cannot imagine. This is far beyond our imagination. I mean, I'm not daydreaming. People can also still have hope that we could get such kind of support, but I don't have I don't have that kind of optimism, because Myanmar's revolution is a self-help revolution. But then what can international community could do effectively is supporting the civil society organizations, because they are the voices of the people from the grassroots, from the ground, and they can amplify the voices, and these civil societies can also act like corrective of the international support. So this is like, this is in the interdependent process.
Absolutely. And I think there's that sort of beautiful element of, if you are supporting the local groups, then you're not just supporting the change that those groups want to accomplish, you're actually empowering the people who are already from that society, engaged in that society, to bring about change themselves, instead of trying to step over them and do the job yourself, but then typically leave without establishing some sort of sustainable long-term plan. So yeah, I think I really appreciate the direction that you take that, and the thought that goes into the recommendations that you're making. But the other question then is, on the German side or the European side, how much interest do you find that there is in this? I mean, the fact that Germany has now developed feminist foreign policy is certainly a very big step. But as you point out, there have been a lot of things going on around the world, not just the Myanmar crisis, which would have contributed to this. Are you finding that you are getting good traction on the German side, that people are interested in this, that people see the value of talking about and trying to promote feminism within the Myanmar revolutionary context? Or are you having difficulty engaging policymakers, government, NGOs to actually understand the significance of this?
To promote feminism or women's rights within Myanmar or within the democracy movement, it is, I think we should see this, we should start this point with ourselves, because when people in Myanmar or when people in resistance movement, if they can't change their mindset, or if they cannot change way of their thinking, then we cannot expect that the people from outside or international community from outside could empower that process. So this is the very first thing. And the second thing is I am in touch with the feminists, with fellow feminists around the world, and I always present voices of women and marginalized groups in Myanmar, here in Germany and also in the European Union. And I encourage the decision makers to get in touch more and more with groups on the ground, and to listen what they need, and also to think about the support they would like to give to Myanmar. So this is the step I take. And the second step is, of course, we also have to advocate ourselves. I mean, ourselves means like within our revolutionary forces, you know. So sexual harassment or sexual assault, when this case happens, it is not, it won't help. It appears that it would help the revolution, but believe me, it won't help, because it is not sustainable way of solving a conflict. And also in the meantime, it is just, hiding these things behind the curtain. It will last also just very, very shortly, and then later when it comes up, then you will get more and more criticism and so on. So, and also it is an act of responsibility. If we want to build a democratic country, if we want to build a country with federal democracy, we have to learn. We have to learn patriarchy, but we have to learn responsibility and accountability, because I think this is also where this is also what I have been talking with decision makers here in Germany and also in the European Union, because they always see that, amidst these armed conflict, where is accountability? Where is responsibility? So this is where it came in, you know. And the last thing is Germany's feminist foreign policy states that not only it is not a binary approach, it is about women and marginalized groups. So I try to deliver messages from Myanmar, and then my approach is very clear. Germany is the very generous donor of humanitarian assistance. So when Germany, when Germany think about humanitarian assistance for Myanmar, they need to think about what they have written in their feminist foreign policy, and with that focus, how they could empower women and marginalized groups in Myanmar, and to strengthen their resilience, and in the meantime strengthen the resilience and also empowering women and marginalized groups in Myanmar. It means that Germany is contributing very, very prior step of building democracy in Myanmar.
Excellent. There was a lot. There was a lot there. But but it kind of shows like the layers of thought that go into it. It shows the different sort of pieces of the puzzle all trying to work together cohesively. But to take a slight detour from the policymakers and the high level talks, let's talk a little bit about the exhibition that recently happened in Brussels. This is a very different way of trying to get the message out, of trying to raise awareness of not just raise awareness of what's going on in Myanmar, but to raise consciousness of these issues in general, I think. So can you tell us a little bit about the exhibition and what was its sort of overall purpose and theme, and how successful do you feel it was?
Yes, the exhibition was quite successful. We had the exhibition just for a very short period. It was from 20 to I think 24th March. Correct. It could be a bit wrong date, but it was very short. It was for a week exhibition, but the people who came in to the exhibition, I talked with them as a co-curator, and they told me the very first reaction was, "Oh, we didn't know these things are happening in Myanmar." So then is so I always say, so first on the checklist is Myanmar back on the agenda. So, or in the meantime, agenda of daily thinking of the people around the world. So, because you already mentioned that now is everywhere conflicts and people are overwhelmed by conflicts around the world. But in the meantime, why they should still think about Myanmar? So, this was also one of the messages we wanted to deliver via the exhibition. But in the meantime, the other parallel message we wanted to deliver was to focus on women and marginalized groups in Myanmar. So when you see the artworks from the exhibition, these artworks are specifically focusing on women and their daily lives, and also their survival, and in the meantime their resilience. I know that word is very fashionable, but I have to use that word as many as I can, because you can see that we had, because when we talk about the exhibition, when we discuss about the concept of the exhibition, the very first thing is women and marginalized groups in Myanmar, they don't want to be seen as victim. This is a very important message. And second thing is, yes, they are in the biggest humanitarian crisis in Southeast Asia, but they still have this courage to continue their life. They still have the women and marginalized groups in Myanmar. They have this courage to face these challenges, social challenges, political challenges, or deadly challenges, daily life, but they still survive. They are trying to survive. This is the message we want to send to the world. So it was also successful because I've talked with, after the exhibition, I've talked with some decision makers in the European Union, and they told me that the exhibition was an eye opener. Because as I mentioned before, the voices of women and LGBTIQA+ or marginalized groups were unheard or overlooked. So that's why they were like, oh, it was an eye opener. We didn't knew that these things are happening. And we also had like artwork, for example, displaying faces of women political prisoners. And this just awake the awareness of the audience who were at the exhibition. So it was quite successful. These were the two messages we wanted to deliver, and I would say these two messages well received.
Because you mentioned that there was the exhibit, if I remember correctly, where you have to walk through the tunnel of Tamain.
Yes.
I think, yeah, and it just, I don't know, something about it, the way that it links back to what we were discussing before with the Tamain being weaponized by the women in the revolution to stop the military, but and you mentioned that even Westerners, people who are completely divorced from Myanmar culture, who've probably never actually seen a Tamain before in their lives, to be honest, you say are hesitant to walk underneath them.
Yes, that's true. Because the part of the art installation was the sign, the warning. The warning says it is not literally, but I can cite it. It means that everyone, so be aware of this tunnel. Everybody who goes through, especially male person, go through this tunnel, would lost his poem, and the artist will not be held accountable for that. So that warning just hits hard to some people, because I saw that I was sitting in the gallery and I saw that some young European audience, they just read the sign and they thought, really? Because we also translated the word poem, what does it mean, and so on. So they were like, really, it affects like that. And also sometimes they joke, they joke that, oh, did you recognize something change or something like that. So this is where it hits me, because this is just a warning, and also this is an art installation with this very strong message. But in the meantime, only through this simple sentence, one people rethink about it. So you can imagine that we, as Myanmar society, we have this kind of brainwash ideas for decades. So you could imagine that such kind of brainwashing, how they are functioning and how they are living inside our minds and our thinking. Yeah.
But it's just it's so strange to think it, because this is the concept of porn is a concept that was completely new to these people. They've never even heard of porn before they came to the exhibition. So the concept of losing it should mean nothing to them. And yet, and I don't know what this says about us as a species, but it just feels, I don't know, like it feels unsettling that a person would react to this threat so readily, despite the fact that you're basically saying, well, they're running the risk of losing a thing that they've never even heard of before, by walking under clothing, and yet it gives people pause. So I don't know what the lesson is here.
I think this is then, I mean, we didn't want that very broad discussion, but in the meantime, which gives me a thought of masculinity, and also about thinking that, oh, I would lose my aura, I would lose my masculinity. So this is kind of, I mean, the concept of masculinity is, it might be slightly different, but the original one is always the same. I'm a male, I'm a man, and I have to be masculine, and masculinity means this and that. This is the social construct. What society? I mean, so this is like, oh my God! If I go through this tunnel, I will lose my masculinity. No, I won't do that. So this is kind of what this kind of masculinity thought did to people around the world, no matter which culture they come from.
I think that's a fascinating takeaway. The universality of our connection to this concept of masculinity. It's not something you think about, or at least not something that I very often think about. But yeah, it's true. It reminds me of a friend of mine who was talking, and he came from Kachin, and he said that he claimed, obviously I can't speak to the truth of this, but he claimed he saw a man with tribal tattoos on his arms. And these like the system, a series of dots, and saying that the tattoos provide protective effect, and that he saw this man being assaulted by an entire group of assailants, and he was able to fight all of them off without becoming injured because of these tattoos. But then he told me that, but in order for the tattoos to work, the man has to not touch or come into contact with certain things that are seen as inherently feminine. And I can't remember what they were, but I remember specifically he said a mop. You're not allowed to touch a mop because that's an inherently feminine cleaning item. And it's fascinating because it wasn't the same concept as the Bama concept of porn. It didn't work in the same way. These were different tattoos and all that. And yet the fundamental element that coming into physical contact with anything that is viewed as an extension of womanhood is inherently corrosive to your manhood.
Yeah.
It's perverse, and it goes further. You mentioned the tamain have to be dried behind the house, and Longyi and men's paso are dried in the front. But then I found out that you can't wash them together. It's not that you have to dry them separately; you have to wash them separately.
You can't wash them together.
Yeah, and so it feels very unusual, but I have to be honest. Like we've seen this. There's a famous documentary in the West called "We Were Neighbors," which follows a couple of Bosnian Muslim families during the Bosnian War. And it's a village that is half Bosnian, half Croatian, and it follows these families until, they go from a relatively peaceful, happy existence, being neighbors and being friends with each other, to the relationships between the two communities deteriorating, and ultimately the Muslims have to escape, and the Croatians come and they destroy all of their homes. But it struck me, this was in the 90s, and there was a scene towards the beginning where the man is being asked by his wife to help her wash some dishes. And he's having this he's feeling shame that he's on camera washing dishes, and that as a man, this is something that, like, how could my wife ask me to do something so debasing and so low? And she's trying to argue back and say, well, no, like, this is your chance, like, show off how modern and developed our country is, and show off like the how helpful men are in our nation. And he's clearly like incredibly uncomfortable. And I'm thinking, this was the night I was alive during this time. And I come from a nearby country as well. I'm like, Jesus, this is terrible. So things can move quickly.
Yes, because you just mentioned the points modern and developed. Because I mentioned the points there is some progress. There are some progress within among young generation when we talk about gender equality, when we talk about women's rights and so on. But the indicator or the criteria we use, or not we use, the criteria which were used are, for example, buying a sanitary napkin, or you help a woman or a person washing dishes, or you just you use every year on the day on International Women's Day, you showed up on social media with you use tamain on your head or something. You put tamain on your head or something, but it should be more than that. This is like, I feel like this is kind of pink washing. Okay, some symbols are very important and messages are very important. But in the meantime, if we are not successful to unlearn patriarchy, which is within our body, which is within our thoughts, then it is not more than pink washing. You say that, okay, I'm a man, I bought somebody a sanitary napkin, or I have understanding how women would have pain while they have their periods, especially in the jungle, at the front, and so on. But it is not all what feminism or what intersectional feminism would count. It is more than that. So this is also which we have to digest. This is kind of knowledges which we have to digest within our generation.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, the what we might call virtue signaling is quite prevalent. There was an old cartoon I saw about this of I think it was actually in French, but it's been translated to every language. This woman's like washing the dishes, and the husband comes home and says, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's International Women's Day. Just leave it and do it tomorrow." And it's it captures this attitude of completely missing the point. But I take your meaning there, and then the question becomes, what can actually be done here? Because there are all sorts of ideas that come forth. Like Iceland had a really interesting policy where they said that regardless of the ratio on a board of directors, there must be at least 3 women, there must be at least 3 men. Because they said if you have one woman on a board of directors dominated by men, that's just a token woman and her job is to sit in the corner and shut up. If you have 2 women, then those women can agree with each other, but the men will sort of ignore them. Once you have 3, they said 3 women is enough to have an idea bounce back and forth, that the men cannot ignore that conversation. They have to participate in that conversation, and they cannot silence that conversation. That they've calculated that there is this minimum dynamic that you need to have of 3 who can support one another's perspective and support the women's advocate for the women's cause within the organization. So I know that there are these types of ideas, but what can really be done to stop this type of virtue signaling, this pinkwashing, as you say, and get people to understand that it's not enough to make a social media post, it's not enough to basically draw attention to yourself and say, look at me, I'm such a good feminist, but then go back to expecting your girlfriend to not only work a job, but then also come home and cook for you and clean for you and do all these other additional labor things. Like what can be done to shift people into actual feminism and not performative feminism?
The very first thing is education, and education, not only, I am not meaning by that not only the formal education, but also informal education and also civic education. Because I also mentioned at the beginning, when we mentioned the word feminism, people would think firstly, oh, this is again NGO vocabulary and so on. No, feminism or women's rights these are the words which are affecting our daily life. But people should see that. So how can they see that? Via education, and also via, why I say here education, because without proper education, people cannot learn what that is, what patriarchy is. People cannot see the society through their critical eyes. And this also should start within families, how sons are raised or how daughters are raised, and also what is then gender neutral raising of children. So such kind of knowledges are to be passed to the society, to the people. So which is then the most effective way, or which is then the effective way, of course, then the education. And second thing is then, because you mentioned 2 women, this 1 woman, 2 women, 3 women. And for me is having 50-50 in a committee or whatsoever, in a cabinet or whatsoever, it doesn't mean really gender equality. Gender equality means more than that, more than 50% women and 50% men sitting inside a room. it is gender equality means that the unpaid work of these domestic work of women have to be recognized, and also once the policies are made for the whole country, it should be considered that what would affect the women and marginalized groups, and also even building building or something like that. So this is the gender should be taken as an aspect, a mass aspect in every policy making process. So then we could say this is then approach to gender equality, because women's rights and also the situation of women and LGBTIQA plus in a country, it is also a barometer of a country. It is barometer of societal norms and also democracy of a country, because the world is now very improved. So the other countries will also look at you. And the third thing is like having more and more women in the politics and in other areas with their feminist knowledge. This is also important, because we have 50% of women, but women who don't encourage other women to be with them, to be at the position where they are, then it will not lead anywhere. So this is the third one. The fourth one is I already talked about considering or taking account women voices being taken account and so on. So it means that just and learn to think about, this is not area for women. For example, when we talk about defense or when we talk about security, I mean, the world has changed. I already told about that, because we have now security vocabulary. The security vocab is also expanded. We are now talking about human security. When we talk about human security, we have to talk about women's security and security of LGBTIQ plus and marginalized groups. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it just made me think what you said about 50% not being equality. It just started me thinking about the so many ways in which these feminist goals can be subverted, and one of them being through statistics. It's very easy to manipulate numbers and make yourself look good, when in reality, as an organization, you're not doing good things. One of my high school mathematics teachers told me that statistics is just lying, but with numbers, and it's true. The employment of women, for example, has in fact, in many sectors, been decreasing as feminism pushed forth, because previously in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, massive numbers of women used to be employed in secretarial tasks, in calculation work, in administrative jobs that have been supplanted by computers, and opening up the doors for women to enter these educated fields, in many cases did not actually make up for the bleed in the women who were being fired by the hundreds as computers and calculators and other such technologies came in to replace them. So it just reminded me of that whole problem with trying to find and quantify mathematically equality, and reaching these types of goals. But the other thing, you say that it's vital to have women entering politics and women with feminist understanding entering politics. And this is something that I think in the Myanmar context is a very interesting point, because Myanmar is famous internationally for the figure of Aung San Suu Kyi, and having this woman who was barred from taking the presidency by the military, and then the party creates this position for her, the state councillor position, to continue to give her a position of authority and respect and leadership within the NLD, even after the military had made it impossible for her to take the actual nationally recognized leadership position. And the impression that this gives is that Myanmar is a country in which the political sphere already is reasonably feminist and already recognizes the power of women and the legitimacy of women, and is welcoming to women who would want to rise through the ranks and would want to contribute in the political realm. And of course, now in the National Unity Government, we have characters, I should say, figures like Zima Ong taking very powerful, very prominent positions as a woman. Do you feel though that the political sphere is significantly more, I don't want to say misogynist, but let's say male oriented than this image would indicate?
I would say that I have seen a lot of manuals in recent 3 years, and sadly, I have to say it's still male dominated, because I mentioned the point that because it is then unconflict, at the time of unconflict, and I already mentioned that because of security, because of defense policy, people still think that defense policy or security or fighting with weapons, this is thing for men. This is kind of masculine things. So this kind of thinking should be changed. Of course, you mentioned that Aung San Suu Kyi or Zima Aung, the figures in the Myanmar politics. But in the meantime, I think having one or two figures, it is not enough, because I already mentioned, we make women in Myanmar make more than half of the population. So if women's voices are ignored and continue to be ignored, then even when the federal democracy or democracy is back in Myanmar, it will be a democracy with deficit, because the barometer on women's rights or gender equality is always down. So this is the kind of thinking which progressive leader, or when one call him or herself progressive leader, they should consider about this. This is first thing. The second thing is I've already told, women with feminist thinking, and also women in leadership position, they also should consider, okay, how can I multiply persons like me, or how can I empower other women who want to get involved in politics or other sector of the society. So this should be done by strict policy. And other thing is, of course, I talk about sexual harassment and so on, but it is also here very important that Myanmar is a country with domestic violence, and so domestic violence, sexual harassment against women and LGBTIQA+ should be also strictly prohibited. Should be also strictly considered in policy making process. How can we prevent it, and also how the perpetrators can be held accountable? So these kind of thinkings should have feminist background. Otherwise, it is just like you have some words on paper in an implementation process. You don't implement anything, then it is just words on paper.
Absolutely. And just thinking about, now that you've mentioned domestic violence, that did occur to me when I was in Myanmar, just the frequency of domestic violence, just the way that it was spoken about. It just seemed to me, I wasn't reading the newspapers, but it just seemed to me that it was just a thing that was happening far more frequently than it seems to happen here in the West. And I mean, maybe it's the acoustics, but living in those concrete, 10-story apartment blocks, you can hear domestic arguments from, across the street in a lot of cases, and they're a very, very frequent occurrence. It very much felt to me that domestic violence seems to be, I don't want to say accepted, but people just seem to acknowledge that it's a part of life, much more so than they would in the West. I remember being quite disturbed by this. Is there is there some type of sort of cultural miscommunication happening that I've misunderstood what was happening, or is Myanmar culture simply not as aggressive in stamping out domestic violence as others? Because it just, now that you mentioned it, it just made me remember just how often I came across domestic violence as a topic, not witnessing it myself, fortunately, but hearing about it happening and hearing about its frequency within Myanmar society.
Yes, it is very frequent in Myanmar society, and the first thing is domestic violence. Cases of domestic violence are very, very few reported because people's always, or let's say the community says, oh, this is personal. You guys are just a couple, so you guys just talk and then it will be solved. This is a very, very wrong approach, because violence within a household, it is not to be accepted. It is not to be tolerated. This is also what I have mentioned in my podcast series. And another point is marital rape. So marital rape. So in Myanmar, the societal thinking is, if a couple get married, they can do whatever they want. So this is like this is another complicated social phenomena, but let's take very, very short view of that. So they can do whatever they want. So even though without consent, having sex within the marriage, it means it is marital rape. But people in Myanmar cannot accept that. This is the first thing. So this has to do with what I mentioned, the old, outdated ideologies. And the second thing is, then when the society, when people in the population, they cannot accept that, but then the policymakers should be progressive enough to think that to prevent and to protect women in the community, in the society, because this is their job. They have their mandate that we give them our vote to make laws which could affect positively to us, which could help us to survive in this society. So this is kind of, but I'm talking about a scenario where democracy could work, but it is very, very far beyond. Let's take a step back. So what would be then a very initial step of that? So first thing is the sexual harassment and also sexual assault within the resistance movement should be held accountable. It is not about, because these sexual harassment and sexual assault within the resistance movement are more than sexual. These are sometimes abuse of power. These are sometimes demonstration of power by male leaders or by male authorities. So these should be stopped. And how can it be stopped? I already mentioned making law and policy which prevent this. And in the meantime, we have to talk about it openly, because, as I mentioned before, hiding these things, sweeping these under the carpet, it will not help anybody.
Absolutely. Another thing that I just want to be conscious of as well is, and you've been very sort of consistent throughout the interview in giving reference to the LGBTQIA plus community, but I want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence in delineating between the specific problems and the specific struggles that women face within society and the specific struggles of the LGBT plus community. To what extent do you feel that these two movements, these two struggles overlap, and to what extent do you think they need to be treated as two separate things that need separate sets of solutions in place?
So overlapping is, I start with very sad note. It is then discrimination. So this is where it overlaps, this is where it intersects. And in the meantime, when we find solution not only so this is why I start this is also where it starts me to think about queer feminism or then intersectional feminism. So when we find solutions for these problems, these societal problems, very first thing is to listen what the communities want, to what LGBTIQA plus wants, because the cultural and the historical evidence show that the challenges and also difficulties which LGBTIQA plus communities are facing are slightly different than what women in Myanmar are facing. Because LGBTIQA plus person were people were discriminated using religion. They were discriminated by member of a community saying that, oh, they are not human or something like that. So this is another level of inhumane treatment. So that's why I would say that this is where I wouldn't say to take them as a different part of solution, but in the meantime, what are the intersection of discrimination and how it can be removed or how it can be solved. So this is where women in LGBTIQ plus communities could talk together, and they can also develop the solution, and they can also talk what they want. This is very first step. And the second step is, of course, then the policymakers should also, again, be enough progress to see this is also a part of society, and this is what they have to consider in policymaking.
Absolutely, which would presumably be a relatively difficult thing to get the policymakers to understand, considering that relatively few of the policymakers currently would have the necessary experience and the necessary training to be able to fully comprehend these problems, or potentially to recognize that they exist in the first place.
Yeah, this is what I mentioned before. This is why education, and also of course then in the meantime this exchange with the communities. This is very important, because without any exchange with community, you cannot know that what the community really needs. And you just at the end of the day, you just make policies which are leading nowhere.
So you would say then, for example, let's say gay groups need to be more visible, they need to be more vocal, they need to be engaging more frequently and more directly with those policymakers and stating very clearly to those policymakers, these are the problems that we're facing, these are the policies that would help us to overcome these problems. Like that has to happen. It has to be feeding to the policymakers the community's needs, rather than the policymakers coming in and trying to do their own research from the outside.
LGBTIQ plus communities are being vocal for a decade, but their voices are still, again, here is again the same problem with women's rights. Their voices are unheard, or let's say overlooked, or sometimes pretend not to be heard. So that's why they are still trying to struggle to present what they want and what they are facing. So I have to, for me, I just have to appeal that this is not late. This is now a decisive moment for Myanmar. When we talk about we are building new Myanmar, we are building federal democratic country, then now is a very good time to listen people what they really want, and also taking them into account.
I think that's a very nice, direct way to put that, and I think that's a very natural tone for us to conclude on. Before we do end the episode, however, we always invite our guests to leave us with some final thoughts, something for our audience to consider as they go on about their day. Could be directly related to what we discussed, or it could be something a little bit more broad. But if there is anything that you want the audience to know, want the audience to consider, want the audience to think about and share with their friends, I would invite you to just share your thoughts with us now.
The very, the very first thing pop up in my mind is women's rights and rights of minorities, rights of marginalized groups are not to be considered separately from the revolution. If we understand the broader definition of the word revolution, it is not only about fighting against the military junta. It is about fighting, it is about building a new society. It is about defending ourselves against these ideologies, discriminatory ideologies. So if you define yourself as an actor of if you define yourself, you are acting actively in the revolution, then stop thinking separately about women's rights and rights of marginalized groups from the whole context of revolution. Then it can get you clearer image of what should be done more effectively.
Many listeners know that in addition to running these podcast episodes, we also run a nonprofit, Better Burma, which carries out humanitarian projects across Myanmar. While we regularly post about current needs and proposals from groups on the ground, we also handle emergency requests, often in matters that are quite literally life or death. When those urgent requests come in, we have no time to conduct targeted fundraisers, as these funds are often needed within hours. So please consider helping us to maintain this emergency fund. We want to stress that literally any amount you can give allows us to respond more flexibly and effectively when disaster strikes. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give it another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
Oba Yarananda Dayananga Yaranaya Dayanam Boda Yaranamano